Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. This one's going to be on the failed Irish Revolution of 1798. The purpose of this is to help you establish your reasoning skills when it comes to what extent is something the responsible, or to what extent is something the major player in the reasons for another event. So when you're looking at all these causes and all of the results, where do you think the biggest issue for this was? And you're going to see a bunch of different things over a timeline of Irish history that I'm going to go over with you. And by the end, my assignment for you all that I want you to consider is, where did this revolt go wrong? What were the things that led to the Irish Revolution? And which ones were the biggest deals that prevented them from succeeding? So I'm going to try to go through lightning fast, especially in the early stuff, because it's really towards the end that matters. But looking at this and looking at the Atlantic revolutions, here's another Atlantic revolution caused by some of the same ideals as the founding fathers of the United States and the French as well in the French Revolution. So why didn't Ireland succeed where the others were successful? And so let's go through some Irish history, or you're not going to like the British, so spoilers alert, they don't do nice things to the Irish. Okay, early stuff. So Ireland before the Normans come in and conquer. 432 CE is the big year for Irish Christianity. Saint Patrick, who was an actual person, arrives and converts the island, brings it to Catholicism. Beforehand, it was pagan, a bunch of feuding tribes. They're the only civilization, island civilization, never to invent boats on their own. So jokes, of course, them just beating the crap out of one another, whatever you want to say. But for the most part, early Ireland is clan, it's rural. But between 600 and 800, there's a lot of Golden Age Christian Ireland. The Book of Kells, which is pictured here as well, probably right above me. I have to look over. Oh, it's right behind me. So there's the Book of Kells. It's a manuscript of the Bible, but it's also very ornately displayed and illuminated, is what's called. They've done all kinds of art, and it's really cool. I saw it at Trinity College when I was there on my honeymoon. But the Irish monks really try to bring in as much as they can in knowledge. And there's actually a whole book called How the Irish Saved Civilization. And one of their biggest arguments is, being so remote, their search and collection of documents survived the Dark Ages, when a lot of places weren't so able to keep these documents secure and safe over time. So in 1795, this kind of ends with Ireland being invaded by the Vikings. And so for the next 300 or 400 years, the Vikings periodically invade Ireland, and mainly around the city of Dublin and the coastline. But these cities build up as Norse men inhabit the land as well and mix. So here we have an island with its own identity, forming own religion. So next up, 1170. Now, keep in mind, the English don't convert to Christianity, Catholicism, until the 11th century, till the 1000s. So Ireland is seen as the first group of Christians, and England comes later. So anyway, Henry II invades Ireland and conquers most of it pretty quickly. He establishes Norman lordship, Norman coming from Normandy in northern France, that eventually take over all of England, and then set their sights on across the Irish Sea into Ireland. One way to impose your will on the people is building very impressive and massive castles like these two pictured. One way of asserting authority. And as you can see by the map, the Normans held most of the land and cities, where there were some pockets where they were allowed to still, I guess, not be under English rule. The Black Death comes, ravishes most cities. Particularly in Ireland, the cities and towns are where the Normans and English are living, and so it actually hurts a lot of their population first. Which brings back, by the 1350s, a resurgence of Gaelic, or Irish. I know a few words. An Kalin Ag. I think that's the girls are swimming. I know I'm really good at this stuff, but Agol is drinking. You know, like it's a weird and interesting language, but it's kind of hard. My my Rosetta Stone isn't doing its justice. But they bring back more Irish customs, Irish dance and dress, and one instrument that's very close to Ireland is the harp as an Irish instrument. All of these are bringing back some Irish identity and pride, which brings us to the 1530s. With Henry VIII severing ties with the Catholic Church, you now have Catholics who Ireland remain Catholic while England remains Protestant. And that creates quite a bit of tension. First, in 1535, there's a full-scale Irish rebellion, and that's responded to by King Henry VIII invading and subduing the Irish. It takes almost a century. But to give you an idea, though, is if you look at the map in the middle, it's land belt held by the Irish versus the English versus the Irish lords. And then you look over on the next one, and it is conquests and established control. And so as you can see, more and more land is being gobbled up by non-Irish, and that's going to be a major feature throughout. Kings allowed the lords that submitted, the Irish submitted to keep their land, but if anyone was rebellious, they were confiscated by the king. During the 9 Years' War, there was some pacification of the island-wide rebellion. What then happened was part of these pacification efforts led to mass famine, brutal warfare, and eventually 1/3 of the population was killed in trying to put this population down again. Irish resisted Protestant conversion due to harsh English methods and a sustained papal effort to retain subjects. Beheadings, murders, all kinds of stuff to try to terrorize the subjects into converting into Anglicanism. Also, the Irish language was to be spoken in English towns and by Englishmen. So Irish was only for the Irish. Yep. I had one more thing. Oh, okay. So here you see the Pale. If you've ever heard the phrase going beyond the Pale, it's basically you're going into Hickville or country. Like you're going beyond the Pale. Like, are you really sure you're going to do that? And the Pale was an area around London, Dublin that the king controlled as his direct lands of Ireland and administration. And so that's where the beyond the Pale comes. Huh. All right, 1600s. So you saw more increased settlement by British, English, as well as Scottish and Welsh, who brought Protestants into Ireland, and they acquired land and took control. Irish Catholics felt continually marginalized by the increased power and prestige of Protestants, and seeing the coming English Civil War, the Irish Catholics rebel in 1641, and England revolts in a civil war in 1642, and so they cannot fight back to get Ireland while the Civil War is going. And so here's some view of the Irish. They're saying that during these rebellion that some of the Irish are so stupid and poor that they either pull their hair and then bashing brains in, or they spit rotisserie children on pikes. This is the kind of stuff that they would post as this what's going on in like woodcuts, so like a newspaper, and how people were treated at these battles. So, anarchy causes atrocities on both sides, as pictured here in these graphic images. And then finally, during the Civil War, the Irish side with the English king, who was Catholic, and then beheaded. So that doesn't work too well. Now, if there's ever a person in Irish history that gets a lot of nasty, it is Cromwell. So during his maybe 4 years or 5 years here in Ireland, he invades Ireland and conquers it completely by 1653. He gives Catholic-owned land to all Protestant settlers. He results in 14% of Irish land is owned by Catholics in 1691. So he basically strips the Irish of a lot of their land holdings. using scorched earth policies, destroying farms, guerrilla tactics, all kinds of stuff. Forbid Catholics from living in towns, from intermarrying with Protestants, forced wealthy Catholics to leave Ulster, which is Northern Ireland, and to Connacht, which is in the west, and really kind of rough land. It's quite cold. It's right on the Atlantic and stuff. That they viewed that the English wanted the Irish to go to hell or Connacht. They didn't care. It is estimated that 1/3 of the island's 400,000 to 600,000 people were killed in all of this. And Cromwell is still a hated name in Ireland today. This is also where we get the terminology for Irish slaves, because they weren't actually slaves. They were just basically war captives that were sent into the Caribbean. So that's Cromwell in a nutshell. I'm trying to keep this short. Cool. Halfway done in 10 minutes now. I'm not doing too shabby. Next up, under the Restoration, where Charles II comes to power after the fall of Cromwell's death, the lands were kept confiscated, but there was some leniency given to Irish Catholics. Protestants felt that they were too kindly treated after their massacres. So after all the Irish were doing, the Irish Catholics, the Protestants were kind of like, you're letting them get away with this stuff. James II succeeded Charles II, and as a Catholic, he repealed many of the anti-Catholic laws. However, Parliament deposed Charles and then put in William of Orange and his wife Mary to take the English throne, causing yet another civil war, hence the William and Mary College named after them. The Irish Catholics sided once again with James, hoping they'd get their rights back. That doesn't go well. And that statue, by the way, on the left, that obelisk, is to the 1690, the Battle of the Boyne, where William barely wins against James's forces, and James II has to flee to France, screwing over Ireland. 1691, loyal Catholic forces surrender, and the remnants of the Catholic army enter French service, so they are allowed to leave and enter the French, which is a common. It's a common theme a lot of times. The French usually do have at least one Irish brigade or an Irish battalion or a group of Irish that are fighting with the Catholic cause against the English because of all this treatment. Now, there were some other laws, more punishments. The laws that treated Catholics and other non-Anglican Christians as less than full citizens, called the Penal Laws, they're increasing the harshness towards Catholics. And within 100 years, Irish Catholic land ownership would be less than 5%. So more and more and more. By the way, this is a statue to William of Orange that was kept up until 1919, when Ireland became independent in 1921, and his statue completely removed. So 1691 to the 1760s. So here's some fun rules and laws for the Irish. Okay, so right now it's ruled by a client state, and only Protestant only Irishmen could serve in Parliament. But the English king and his cabinet oversaw all the rules there too. Protestant wealthy landlords owned much of Ireland. Most lived in England and some in Ireland. So most of the people who owned land in Ireland weren't even in the country. So, the Irish, most of the food by this point are export only. So salt beef, pork, cheese, they were all sent to England. So the people living in Ireland were growing further and further poor at the expense of the English who were living off of this. Most of the common poor Catholic Irish lived in extreme poverty. They would glean foods and whatnot afterwards. Some guerrilla tactics, that's the wrong one. Oh. There were some tactics to use to mess with English production and exports. There were some, burning of fields or chopping up trees and stuff like that. The northern and eastern parts of Ireland, parts that are closest to the English British Isles, or Great Britain, were much more developed than the west and the south. They retained more of their Irish character. So as you can see, some of the rules involved. So, United Irishmen. So you're seeing up until this point the level of awfulness of how Ireland's been treated. So the United Irishmen So Irish-born Protestants began to see Ireland as their home and grew resentful of how the English treated Ireland as a whole. They pushed for a better trade relationship. The Catholics received the right to vote and sit on grand juries and buy land. Irish Volunteer Militia was founded in 1778 to protect Ireland from invasion, first from the American Revolution and then defense of France in 1793. So they had their own military started up and a militia. From these movements came the United Irishmen. Theobald Wolfe Tone stated the goals were to substitute the common name of Irishman for Protestant, Catholic, and Dissenter, and to break the connection with England, the never-failing source of all of our political evils. So here they were looking at, let's look beyond our religion and see how we are united by how English have been treating us. The United Irishmen were originally Republican and wanting to change Ireland through peaceful negotiation and took their model from the French Revolution's National Assembly. So they wanted a republic, which was, of course, really much against the king's wishes. And their ideas spread throughout the island and gained widespread Catholic and Presbyterian, another Protestant descended from mainly the Scots, were also persecuted by the English Church. So it was gaining popularity of uniting here. The United Irishmen were banned after England went to war with the Revolutionary French in 1793, so all Republican ideals need to stop because it looks much more like the French Revolution. This caused them now to push for the armed overthrow of England. Protestant hardliners from Orange Order to resist... the Protestant hardliners form the Order of the Orange to resist the United Irishmen, and that's where we get the three colors of the Irish flag. Green for the Catholic Irish, white for peace, and orange for the Protestants, and the peace between them. England responds first by repressing the population. They use torture, execution, penal colonies, and house burnings. The French agreed to help the United Irishmen in their revolt, sending a 15,000 force. But because of English efforts, they were, like in the picture depicted behind my head, like that, they failed to land the British, have a secure an area to land the troops, and they pulled back. In 1798, though, the waves of rebellion spread throughout Ireland, failed a first insurrection in Dublin, and then throughout the country. In 3 months, 30,000 people had been killed in fighting. The United Irishmen's stance of non-sectarianism was undermined by religious-based attacks on different groups. The English would start attacking the groups, particularly the Irish, worse than the other ones. And Northern Ireland's Protestant and Catholic units were constantly fighting one another. So here's some depictions. Here's one of the attacks. Notice how the Irish are represented in the bottom middle picture. Very brutish, almost like Neanderthals. Wider faces, like they're incompetent or inferior. One of them doesn't have shoes, like they're dirty, poor beggars. When you might use the comment, luck of the Irish, as like, oh, I got Irish luck. It's really not the Irish were lucky. It means the Irish are so poor and stupid and lowly that even they might have something good go for them. That's what luck of the Irish means. So, just so you know, in 2 months when we celebrate St. Paddy's Day, this whole luck of the Irish thing means despite all of the inferiorities of the Irishmen, they still have something come up for them, and that's positive. Fun things to think about. Aftermath. This is from Tone, executed by firing squad in 1798 in November. The Irish leaders were rounded up and executed. I entered into the service of the French Republic with the sole view of being useful to my country, to contend against British tyranny. I have braved the fatigues and terrors of the field of battle. I sacrificed my comfort, have courted poverty, have left my wife unprotected and my children without a father. After all I have done for a sacred cause, death is no sacrifice. In such enterprises, everything depends on success. Washington succeeded. Kosciuszko failed. I know my fate. But I neither ask for pardon nor do I complain. I admit openly all I have said, written, and done, and I am prepared to meet the consequences. As, however, I occupy a high grade in the French army, I would request that the court, if they can, grant me the favor that I may die the death of a soldier by firing squad rather than by hanging or decapitation. He was executed by hanging, by the way. So there you go. Acts of Union in 1800, it consolidated the British Empire into the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. And so our English got much more control over Ireland, and the legal discrimination of Catholics was abolished in Ireland, though economic discrimination was not. And to follow up what happens with the Irish, if you look at the poverty in Ireland on the eve of the famine, you look at the series of injustices of how the English have taken control. And then you look at the Great Potato Famine and where populations were taken out. You see that this was a direct result, I guess, of all of this. So when we look at all of this as a whole, what are some of the reasons why this rebellion failed? The point for this assignment is to look at the several factors that led to this and then make your own claim. So was it, and here are some of the reasons you can use. You need 5. You could use the lack, you could say they had foreign support. They didn't have foreign support because it wasn't successfully landed. The English were close by, so geography played a factor. The fact that the Irish produced so much food that England needed Ireland, whereas they didn't have as much reliance as on the Americas. Was it the religious conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants? Was it just the poverty over time the English kept doing? Other factors might include, well, if you can think of more. But what I want you to do and think about, leadership. You have Tone right here, who was able to unite a lot of people, and you had a unified cause and vision. So there's another one. I want you as an assignment to look at 5 of these and break them down what you think the most important factor in all of this was that made Ireland eventually not be able to succeed where the others were. And I'll have this all written out for you. But anyway, thanks for watching and good luck.